We have an hour, I think. Maybe a little bit more, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm sure someone will come and stop me. I'm going to kind of take you on a bit of a journey. I'm going to introduce myself, the kinds of things that I've done in a bit more detail. I'm going to share with you some of my ideas, some of my thinking, and then hopefully I'm going to kind of do a bit of a deep dive into the school that I've started in Bolton, and how we've done and why we've done what we have done. I think kind of give you a real deep dive into the kind of operation. So there's going to be a lot of information coming at you. You should put your seatbelts on. And, you know, I'll be happy to kind of hang around afterwards. And if there are questions, I'll be happy to kind of go through things. So let's kind of start off. It's been kind of an interesting journey for me because my background is as a chemistry teacher. I taught chemistry for 11 years at my predecessor school. I then became part of a leadership team in my predecessor school. And that was kind of the time when things really started because, as I said this morning, my first challenge as a senior leader, as a very eager senior leader, to make things happen, was the challenge of the laptop trolley. We know what that's about, right? Okay? So that whole experience, I'm going to bring the laptop trolley in, and even before I bought it in as a teacher, I've probably argued with someone. I won the argument, so I get to use it. I know some of the devices are probably not going to work. I know some might not connect to the internet. And then I see the hands going up, and then there's this thing about I've forgotten my password. Okay? So one of my kind of first problems to solve was very much around that. And what I did was I looked at the cost of one of these things. We have 5 of these to replace. And one of these cost £22,000. So I thought to myself, what can money buy me? And I started my journey from that point onwards because I stumbled upon this new tool called the iPod Touch. So this is 2008. We've got to go back in time a bit. Okay? So there was no iPads, there was no tablets. But I came across this thing called the iPod Touch. And one of the things that I kind of noticed was that for £22,000, I could buy 180 of these things. And in each year group, we had 180 children. So I thought that was a sign from above. So we ended up kind of replacing all the laptop trolleys and buying 900 of these things. And it was kind of an interesting journey. So the first thing we kind of noticed was there were some barriers and blocks. You know, Wi-Fi was important. We realized that at the time. But we also realized that, you know, there were things that needed unblocking and ports and this and that and all this technical stuff. But there was something that kind of started the journey, and the thing that we realized right at the beginning was the difference between mobility and portability. So these are 2 very different kind of things. So portability was, you know, getting laptops out and putting them on the desk and sitting down and typing, a very secretarial type approach. But mobility was very different. I'm using this device, I can take it home, bring it back with me. You know, I can take pictures, record my voice. There's something new called the App Store that had just happened, you know, and there were new tools coming out every week. So the teachers were learning new things, the students were discovering new things, and we kind of really began to appreciate the mobile environment. But then something else happened as well. Kind of realized something about these devices. And in 2008, this bit was magic. So what happened was that when you switched on this mobile device, it actually came on. So you remember 2008? You come to a computer, you switch it on, and then I'm going to go make a coffee. And maybe by the time I come back, it's time to put my password in. And that meant things weren't simple, and they weren't reliable, and therefore, people never used to use it. So one of the things we also began to see at this time was people and teachers were actually beginning to embrace this for the simple reason that it worked when you switched it on. So that was a time when I suddenly kind of realized that I no longer really needed to focus on technology. What we really needed to focus on was teaching and learning. And the pedagogy, and how does that really change, and how does that make a difference? So a lot of the things that you're going to hear about today is what I call the plumbing. So what do I mean by the plumbing? Easiest thing to do in the world, buy a bunch of devices and give them out to all the students. That's the easy bit. Because these devices, I describe them like taps. You know, you have taps sticking out of a wall, shiny, turn them on, water comes out. But the water doesn't come from the tap. It comes from all the plumbing that's behind it. So the question that we have to ask ourselves as educators is, what does the plumbing look like in my school? And that's not just Wi-Fi and internet and connectivity. That's important. But what does the teaching look like when all my students have the power of this device in their hand? What does the learning look like? The messy bits, you know, when you give feedback and the students respond, and then you've got to try and explain, and you're trying to work out whether they've really understood a concept or not. So this is the bit that's kind of really focused me. And over about 4 years ago, I put an application into the UK government for a new school, and this is the Olive Tree. It's got an interesting context, which I'm going to share with you as well. It's in my hometown. I'm going to call Bolton Tron from now on. I think I'm entitled to do that. It ends the same. But we've done a whole bunch of different things with this environment. We've really focused on that plumbing, and we've seen some huge successes, which I'm going to share with you, and hopefully I'll be able to do a bit of a deep dive into this as well. But one thing that you should know is, you know, we have a very unique induction program for all our teachers that work here. And part of that, some of which was alluded to kind of in the morning, is that we have all our teachers trained on Twitter. So when they do amazing things in the classroom, it's tweeted out under that hashtag or under that name. So even today, if you are not on Twitter, I would recommend that you sign up, because I know a lot of you will be playing on stuff whilst you're listening to me, okay? It's worthwhile signing up, even if you don't post, even if you just sit and watch what happens. There are hashtags like Primary Rocks, and there are hashtags like Amazing Learning, and so on, where teachers all around the world are posting amazing things that they're doing in their classroom. So, I kind of sometimes describe it as the world's best professional development program, okay? And certainly you can see what's going on in the classroom in our school. So what have we done here? What is it that's actually different? We have a different philosophy in this school. It's very much centered around belief, and you'll see why as the presentation goes on. We've got three simple words. It's believe, you, and can. Because one of the things that's really important for the children that come to this school is that they must have belief in themselves in terms of what's possible. And when a person has belief, it's possible to change something that you might have think impossible into the possible. So that's quite key to understand that. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to speak to you about, in fact, everything that I talk to you about are things that I have implemented in a school. So if you came to me and said, I really want to see this in a classroom, I could take you to the Olive Tree and I could actually show it you happening in the classroom. And for me, that's kind of very, very important. We've also implemented this in other countries. And my latest project was in this school in India. So this was quite fascinating for me, because this school of 1,000 students that's right on the outskirts of Bangalore, where power will disappear for an hour or two every day, actually really understand the need for preparing children for a future that doesn't exist yet, for jobs that haven't been invented yet. And they had already made a decision that every student was going to have their computer. And I asked the head teacher, what brought you to that decision? And he said, well, it's very simple. We look at what you guys have done in the West and done it wrong, and then we skip that and move on to the next bit. Okay? So the idea of mobile learning was already there even before I was involved. But what they were very interested in is in the plumbing. So they came to my school, they walked around the classrooms, they spoke to the children, spoke to the teachers, and I've been kind of very closely working with this school to implement the plumbing. And that's been really important for me. I've also kind of contributed to different articles and books and things like that. That's kind of out there. And not long ago, I was at the EduTech conference as well. I did a keynote there and did some workshops and so on. So kind of a lot of the things that you hear, I've kind of shared quite publicly as well. But let me get on with the actual story, and let me give you some context about the school, because this is really important. 80% of the students that come to this school come from 10 to 15% of the most deprived areas in the UK, measured by different indices. What you're seeing on the screen now is data, national data, but also that map is actually from my locality, from the school. This is the town that I live in. This is my community. And the reasons I'm going to give, for reasons I'm going to give you in a moment, this is the reason why I do what I do. It's my moral imperative. So I'll give you a few facts, and this is actually a big report. If you live in that part of town that's red, on average, you live 8 years less compared to somebody that lives in the more affluent part of town. If you live in that town, the part of town that's red, you are more likely probably to have one parent, not the other parent. You are more likely to come from a family that is second or third generation unemployed. You are more likely to come from a family that actually doesn't speak English as well. So for me, this is kind of a driving factor. And the other thing is that if I look at the other side of town, there's some fantastic schools there. The kids come out with fantastic results. Great. And if I do the same at the Olive Tree and I actually give my students the best experience and they just come out with fantastic results, they're still not going to get where they need to get in life because of the backgrounds and the experiences that they've come from. So what we've done is we've looked at the way in which we design learning. And we've tried to look at a number of things. Of course, we want the best results. We want them to be fantastic. But we want them to have experiences, and we want them to be ready for that world that doesn't exist. That's why mobility and the use of mobile tools is really important. We will not compromise on that. So we use the best possible tools that we can to get our children used to the idea of change. Every week there are new tools that come out. They get to grips with it. They get to explore it. They get to see it. So this is part of our DNA. It's what we do. And if you came to our school and you said, Abdul, show me what your teaching looks like, what I would show you is probably very different. And how we plan for it and prepare it and plan it, we do it in a very different way. If you ask me, Abdul, how do you do feedback and mark your books? We do that in a completely different way. Very, very different. We feel it's more efficient, more powerful. But we've changed it because we felt we can. I'll share that with you later on. If you ask me how we do professional development, that's different. But probably one of the biggest things that we've changed in the school is this. Because quite often in schools, what happens is we focus on trying to change people's behavior. Don't do this, you should do this, this is allowed, this is not allowed, and so on. And when we try and change behavior, it's very difficult. And quite often people change behavior, but they do it because it's out of interest. It's out because the head teachers told me, because these are the rules, and the belief isn't there. And what we focused on is trying to make change happen based on belief. Because belief is the thing that changes behavior. So how do you change belief? Okay? How do we change belief? So in my experience, there are two key ingredients. If these two ingredients are there, it's possible to change belief. So look, the two ingredients are simplicity and reliability. If you are able to make something simple, present it in a very simple way that everybody understands it, people come on board. If it's reliable, you do it each time, you've tested it over and over again, and it works each time, then people's beliefs change, and therefore behavior change. That sounds really philosophical. I'm going to give you an example. Let's go back to the laptop trolley. You bring the laptop trolley into the room. You know there's going to be laptops that are not going to work. You know some are not going to connect to the Wi-Fi. You know some students will forget the password. So what's our behavior? That's our belief. We don't say it, we believe it, because that's our experience. So what's our behavior? I'll print 30 sheets of paper just in case. Yeah? I'll print 30 sheets of paper. In case this goes wrong, hey, I'm covered. We print 30 sheets of paper because it's simple and reliable. What's really interesting for me is when that teacher goes home that evening, the same teacher, and they switch the TV on at home, they never think to themselves, let me put some magazines on the table in case the TV doesn't work. It doesn't happen. Why? Because the tools that they're using is actually, the TV that they're using is really simple and reliable. So one of the things that we've done at the Olive Tree is we've really focused on simplicity and reliability. Everything that we do, not just technology, but our approaches to things, we simplify. And that's really hard. It's much easier to leave something complicated. Brains hurt when you sit down and you've got to really take something complicated and simplify it. But it's worthwhile doing. So one of the things that's happened is we get a lot of visitors that come to the school. And they kind of see what we're doing. They walk around. We run leadership programs for a lot of the Nordic countries, Sweden and Denmark and Norway and so on. Because in those countries, the governments have already made a decision that every student will have their own device. So that's not the bit that they're interested in. One of the things that they are interested in is the plumbing. One question we get quite a lot is, as a state school, how do you afford this? How do you make this happen? Financially, how is it viable year on year? And for me, that's been quite an easy question to answer, both when at my predecessor school and at the Olive Tree. Because if I calculate how much printing I do for one student, but over 3 years, okay, for one student, but over 3 years, it's actually cheaper for me to buy an iPad. Now, in the worst case scenario, in some schools, there's so much printing that happens that actually I can offset the whole price of an iPad. But in other cases, most of the price I can offset. But this isn't about not printing, because we still have to put pen to paper, and we still have to print, and there's a certain amount of writing that has to happen, and so on. But in a lot of schools, there's this thing called crazy printing. Yeah, and teachers kind of have become experts with photocopiers. Yeah, we can block paper jams, you know. There's that thing that happens when you stand in front of a photocopier and 30 sheets of paper come out and doesn't belong to anyone. Yeah? There's that other thing that happens as well, where you get people in the organization that don't think about these things. I walked into one office once, and there was a teacher it was that person's office. I can't mention the name, yeah. And there's a pile of paper on the table, and I asked, what's this pile of paper? Is this stuff that you, oh no, those are my emails I'm going to read later. Printing my emails to read them. So for me, this approach has to change. And we've been actually been able to prove that change in behavior, that change in belief, and that change of approach. But there is something that is expensive. There is something that is very, very costly. And for me, the most expensive thing in education is this. I say these are the 6 most expensive words in education. Just keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's not just expensive because of cost. It's expensive because of the intellectual development of people doesn't happen. The world has moved on, and we're still stuck in the same place. And that's expensive. We're not able to use the tools that exist, sometimes free tools, efficiently. because we've just keep on doing the same thing over and over again. So this is something that we've really wanted to change. And the thing about changes is that it's going to keep happening. The one thing I can guarantee the teachers in our school is whatever we do now, we're probably going to get it wrong. But what's important is having conversations on how we get it less wrong. And that's really key. And the idea of change is not something new. It's something that's happened in the past. This morning's keynote resonates with the stuff that's coming up next, but I'm going to try and give you an idea of where I'm coming from, because change is something that has happened in the past, it's happened now, it will continue to happen in the future. If I spoke to people in the room and I said, remember those cassettes and a pencil and we used to rewind backwards? We kind of laugh at that, yeah? But if you take the latest device right now and you put that in the hand of a 5-year-old, that's the rubbishest device they'll probably ever use in their life. They'll probably go older and say, remember when we used to type? So the age of change is something that will continue to happen. And, I'm just going to kind of labor this point a little bit, because the age of change, if you speak to a medieval historian, which I did to a friend of mine, a guy called Bill Rankin, you can look him up. He's a great guy, and some of this stuff is from him. And we have a lot of discussions together. And one of the things that we kind of spoke about was he was telling me about was how the age of change has happened already in the past. So there was this new thing that was invented. It was mentioned this morning. This thing called the Gutenberg printing press? It was new technology because it made books. And what was fascinating about it? For the first time ever, I could print 100 books, give it to 100 people, and tell them, turn to page 43, and everybody's on the same page. Wow. That was amazing. Because before that, people weren't using books. They were using scrolls. Now, apart from the fact that you can't use a scroll and have a Starbucks at the same time, okay? It was very difficult to find information. And there were many people that were really against this idea of books. Because they said, what if you print the wrong information and distribute it? You're basically spreading falsehood. And you're brainwashing people. And when novels were being printed, people used to say, that's a complete waste of time. It's not even true. But what we saw was the printing press continued, and people came up with new ideas to try and do this. And sometimes those people that failed came up with things against this new technology and so on. But one thing that we can say for sure is that books are the tools that remain. That's the technology that succeeded. Why? Because the speed at which we access information in books is much faster. And I know how fast that is, because when I was revising for my exams at school, I'd be going through those little boxes in the library looking for that card, and it tells you what row number, what shelf number. Then you go to that row, go to that shelf, and then you pick the book, and then it's the wrong book. You go back and start again. And that doesn't happen now. Now, if you want to find information, we put our hands in our pockets. We just Google something and we get the answer. But actually, today, it's not about having access to answers. It's actually about asking the right question. And that's a different skill set that's required. If we went to 2014, in 2014, in the Library of Congress in the US, okay, there were just over 13.5 million images archived. In 2014, this happened as well. And it didn't stop there, because now people were actually making information. When this happened, Kodak nearly got wiped out. And Kodak invented digital photography. The world was becoming a changing place, and it didn't stop. And we know this happened because everyone felt it. And the interesting thing is, all these numbers, probably within an hour of making this slide, are all incorrect. We're talking big numbers. We're talking a world that is different. We're talking the difference between the earth and the sun. It's huge. So what does that mean for us? What does it mean? It means that the world that we live in already is very, very different. Very different. What's the first app that's there? Uber, okay? Largest taxi service in the world. Alibaba, largest retail store in the world. Wikipedia, largest encyclopedia in the world. But what's different in the world that we live in is that the largest taxi firm in the world doesn't own any taxis. And the largest retail store in the world doesn't own any products. And the largest encyclopedia in the world, there's no books. This is about information. And this has actually changed our beliefs, whether we like it or not. It's changed our beliefs, and therefore it's changed our behavior. When I was at school, we were told explicitly that you should never get into a car with a stranger. And now what we do, we call strangers to our house, put our kids in the car. Because I can see what's going on. I can see what direction they're going. I know who the driver is. I can see everything. And we're relaxed about it because our belief is different, our behavior is different. So what does that mean? That means that the world that we live in is very, very different. And it means there's new knowledge. It means there are new experiences. It means that as educators, we have a responsibility to look at what's beyond just the curriculum that we teach our children. So at the Olive Tree, we've started to look at something called DQ. So people are familiar with IQ, the intelligent quotient. So DQ is known as the digital quotient. And quite often for schools, they only tend to look at two areas on this. One of them is digital literacy, and the other one is digital safety. But actually, there's a whole bunch of different things that surround this. So even things like screen time and digital health, it's education. It's not about restriction. If you've got a 15-year-old and they want to get onto a screen, doesn't matter what you do as a parent. If they really want to get onto it, they'll do it. So self-regulation and education in these areas is something that we're kind of putting in throughout the school and with all the different things that we do. So this isn't a one-stop shop. It's embedded. There's a lot of discussion over this. Teachers are really looking at this. And even the families that we work with and the parents, we've got workshops for them where they come in and we kind of work with parents around understanding this and what this means. Because actually, if you're a parent today, you can't say, I don't know how to use Twitter. There could be potential risks for your children. It's important to know this. So look, what does that mean in education? So for me, in education, it means a number of different things. First and foremost, I really wanted to understand if we're going to put technology in education and every student is going to have a device with such power, what should we expect in education? What's my return on investment? So in 2007, 2008, when I did the iPod Touch project, I started to look at other organizations, and I couldn't find any other organization that had done this at scale, 1,000 devices out there. I found one place, and it was in Abilene in Texas, and it was a university, and they had done something similar. Okay, so I kind of went to Google, and I'm trying to find out, what's the impact of technology in education. And I kind of got stuck a little bit. So I started to look at other industries. So I typed in 19th century surgery. When you type in 19th century surgery, you get images that look like this. Surgery that's very painful, lots of people, probably surgery in somebody's kitchen, and a very scary looking guy at the door. Okay? But that's surgery in the 19th century. When you type in 21st century surgery, what you get is something totally different. And you can see the impact that technology has had on surgery. What it's done is that it's allowing surgeons to do things that they couldn't do before. And for me, that is what the good use of technology is. I keep asking that question. I get our teachers to ask that question. What is technology allowing me to do now that I couldn't do before? That's why Alibaba is fantastic. That's why Uber looks amazing. It's allowing us to do things that are very different. In London, I got into an Uber, and I asked the taxi driver what it was like working for Uber. Well, he said to me, it's okay, but the pay isn't as good. So I asked him, why don't you just move, go to a different firm that pays better? And do you know what his answer was? I wouldn't mind moving, but I can't take my reviews with me. And my ratings, which determine how many jobs I get. So this is a whole new world now. This is a world of information. It's very much to do with your digital footprint. And when I started getting into technology, half my life had already gone. But children now, their digital footprint could probably be traced. It's important to kind of understand that. So I did do a Google search for 19th century classroom and learning. And when I did, I got images like this. Sitting in rows, facing the front. A lot of Gutenberg technology going on. But then when I typed in 21st century classroom and learning, kind of got a bit difficult. You know when you go to Google Images and you look at page 1 and you don't find the image that you want? Then you go to page 2 and your heart sinks a little bit because you know it's not happening. And by page 3, most people have given up. So I went back to page 1. And the top row, there was this one image that I wasn't kind of too sure of. It kind of messed with my mind a little bit. And it was this one. It was in the 21st century, and I couldn't understand why. So I read the story behind it, and it was really interesting. At one time, this classroom had a chalkboard. With a chalkboard, and you could write on it. Then it went to a whiteboard with a whiteboard marker. But now it was going to get an interactive whiteboard. And you see, that's the problem in education. We've become really good at doing the wrong things really well. And then we repeat it. We're just translating, we're not transforming. And we translate for a little benefit. I went from a chalkboard to a whiteboard because I don't get chalk on my hands and on my clothes. I went from a whiteboard to an interactive whiteboard because I might be able to record the screen. But even then, most teachers are just using the projector, not even the interactive whiteboard. And it's expensive. So one of our ambitions has been to stop doing the wrong things really well. It's about transformation. What does technology allow us to do that we couldn't do before? The fact that you can record someone, go back in time, look at it again, these things kind of became really powerful. And what I really became interested in is, let's look at the fundamentals of education. We know what technology should do now. It should allow us to do things that we couldn't do before. So now let's look at the foundation and the basics of education. And that's when we started to look at what makes good teaching and learning. What are the ingredients for good teaching and learning? So we started with this. We explored the idea of activity. Okay? And there's a whole variety of different kinds of activities that happen in a school, right? And there's activities that are low engagement. Here, just memorize this. That's just recall. But then we can teach skills and concepts. And when kids really understand a skill and a concept, they then begin to kind of think in a very strategic way because they can explain it and talk about it. And when they use that skill to kind of solve problems or come up with new ideas, that's extended thinking. It's a better learning experience. We also then began to look at some of the work that Edgar Dale had done in the turn of the 19th century. Okay? It's really simple stuff. Nothing to do with technology, but stuff that people understand. If I just imagine something, I might be imagining it wrong, and there's no way for the teacher to check me. It's very low engagement. But I could go one better and do kind of the seeing thing. I could show students stuff. And I think that's where a lot of teachers are stuck. We kind of call it death by PowerPoint. It's just slide after slide after slide. A bit like what I'm doing now. But where this gets really powerful is when children begin to do things. when they're actually creating, when they're actually making. And this was something that we kind of, understood, and we really began to kind of think about. So this meant that the way we started to plan our lessons and the way we started to organize our lessons actually became a little bit different. We started to think about how we can design activities that had strategic thinking in there and extended thinking. We started to think about, how can we get children to do things? So for example, take the idea of the water cycle. It's a process. It's a concept. One thing that I could have done is just ask my students to write 100 words on it. Or just actually draw the diagram or copy it out. But if I was to get Play-Doh, and then there's that animation app on the iPads that you can get, stop motion, and I'm getting them to animate the water cycle step by step, so they need to know what the next step is. And then I'm getting them to record their voice on top. So they're not just cutting and pasting text from somewhere else. They've got to articulate and speak and explain using the right language and terminology exactly what's going on. Then this becomes a different learning experience. It becomes a lot more invested from a student's perspective. And it becomes very much involved. And the cognitive demand on a student on that activity is actually much higher than just copying something out of a book. And where this gets even better is when you begin to share that learning. Okay? So we all know about Vygotsky's stuff. But when you share something, people want to make sure it's good. When teachers share something, you want to make sure it's good. It's open to praise. People might say, hey, this is fantastic. But at the same time, it's also open to criticism. And people might say, hey, there's a fault in here. This might be better. And actually, in that zone where you're a bit uncomfortable, that's where the best development happens. So that's one of the reasons why all the teachers that come to the Olive Tree, we put them through a very detailed kind of program around Twitter. And we've chosen Twitter because it's short, it's quick, it doesn't take forever to do. You don't need to keep logging into something. You can just do it very, very quickly on the fly. So this has kind of been an interesting model for us to use. And what we've also done is we've also made teachers aware of the whole SAMR model. So SAMR you probably heard about, right? We want them not just to be stuck in the substitutional phase. I used to write 100 words on something. Now we have iPads, so hey, let's type out 100 words on the iPad. That's not a brilliant use of technology. But what we are interested in is at least at the modification level, where teachers begin to think, how can I design this activity now in such a way that actually the task is going to be different for the students. They're going to be able to do different things. I walked into a classroom one time. They were studying photosynthesis, so they were looking at leaves. They were sat in the only room where there's no photosynthesis happening. The whole school was surrounded by different kinds of leaves. They could have been out there exploring, looking at things, and so on. Didn't happen. So for me, this kind of forms the fundamental of teaching and learning. What we've started to do is then to look at this as a model, okay? And we've really started to then begin to think about the impact of this. And how can we use technology to amplify these aspects? This has become really kind of important to us. So, biggest problem in schools is to get consistency. So some people will do this, some people will not do it. You'll walk into some classrooms, there's great stuff going on. You walk into other classrooms, there isn't great stuff going on. So what we've done is we've focused on a number of things to get consistency. First one, we've looked at relationships. Relationships between teachers, students, parents, even between teachers. Relationships are great when things are transparent. And technology is fantastic at making things transparent. So we use a tool called iTunes U for all our planning. All lessons are planned on iTunes U. We can put all our G Suite apps in there. We can put all our Office stuff in there as well. okay? We can put apps in there, videos in there. It works offline. There's a number of our students that still don't have decent internet connectivity at home, but they can have access to all of this offline. That's really important. The school that I worked with in India, more than half the students won't have decent connectivity, but they can download all the material, all the resources. And they could actually watch a video 5, 6, 7 times, many times as they want. But where this becomes really interesting is the way in which we've arranged for feedback to happen. So what we've done, and I'll kind of try and do a demo. We might need sound for this, guys, yeah? But what we've done here is we use an app called Shobi, which I'm sure people will be familiar with, okay? Or maybe not, right? But there were lots of, the problem sometimes with technology is there are so many tools, people get confused. Which one should I use? Which one should I not use? So we've actually gone the opposite way. Most of the tools that come on the iPad, we use all the G Suite stuff, we use all the Office stuff, and there's a few other apps that we've added, and that's it. Sometimes we ask the wrong question when we get the iPad in our hand. The question that sometimes teachers ask is, which is the best app for science? Which is the best app for maths? Wrong question. The best app for maths is the maths teacher. The best app for science is the science teacher. So what we've really focused on is how we can kind of impact the learning element. So I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a demo on Shobi. Not a demo, this is actually real. So these are real classes that I'm involved in. And we've kind of then looked at, what does technology allow me to do that I couldn't do before? Okay? So these are some real classes. Now, the good thing about New Zealand is you just look at your watch and it's 4:35, so it's 4:35 in the morning in the UK. Let's see if we can wake a few kids up. Or not. Okay, so if I just go to expanded nouns. So this is an activity, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Okay, and I'm just going to pull up a student's work. So this is the place where we don't put resources. That's all at iTunes U. But here is the messy bit around learning. It's the bit that gives me an understanding of where the student's up to. It's the bit where I form relationships and develop the child's learning. And what I love about this is, watch this. They're still writing in books. That's not gone away. But you know what? Nobody at the Olive Tree marks books anymore. Nobody takes books home to mark. Thank you. A few claps. Okay? Because of this, watch. If I want to give feedback on this piece of work, I tap on an icon at the top, I tap here, I hit the record button, and I just speak and give feedback. And it's as simple as that. Okay? And we've created a structure around it. So let me just very carefully cancel this, because I have hit and record one time, and the student gets this, kind of pings, and it gets to them. So what we've done here is when we open this up and we ask teachers to give voice feedback, some teachers were doing it really well. Others needed support. So that transparency has helped us to improve the quality of what happens in a school. And what the teacher's done here is, if I just tap on this one, let's see if this plays, we can hear it.
Well done, Aisha. You managed to put an adjective before a noun here, sharp pincers. Can you underline the nouns?
Okay, so there's some positive stuff at the beginning, and then there's some strategies for improvement, what you need to do to make it better. And that's the structure that we've taken. The first bit is always positive, and then there's some improvement. And what I really kind of love about this, if I go to each student will get different feedback. And what I'm looking at, maybe, I don't know if you can see this or not, if I look on the right-hand side at the top, I can see that this student has responded by voice, but what I can also see is the time at which this student is engaging. This is way beyond school time. Okay? But they can record and they can give feedback. I tap on another student and I look at their time, it's 7:20, 7:18, 7:16. They're actually responding to stuff in the evening. It's quick, it's easy. I'm not having to log in and remember usernames and passwords. It's coming up on my device. What's really powerful about this is actually parents can see this. Parents can see it. What we've also done is we've agreed our non-negotiables. That sounds really harsh. Okay? But if you work in our school, what is the minimum expectation that what we should be doing around teaching and learning? Why is that important? Because I want to give those 8 years back to those kids. I want them to do well in education because education is the thing that will give them social mobility. That's why we have to agree some non-negotiables. And it's not something that the principal decides, it's done through consensus with discussions. And the Green Circle is really about professional development. What we've done with the Green Circle about developing people, in the UK, normally we have training days. So about 6 days a year, on one of the days, the students don't come in and it's just the teachers. So we've collapsed those days, and what we've done is we've added that time on every week. So every week we have professional development. And that allows us to make mistakes. If you get something wrong, we can correct it the following week. It allows us to share good practice. We have a session every week on one best practice. One best thing. What's been really good this week that you've done and it's worked really well? We also have something called one best failure. What did you try and it didn't work? And sometimes our best innovation, our best learning happens through things that haven't worked. And there's a lot of great questions that kind of come out of that. We've also kind of, we get all our teachers to become Apple Teacher Certified. So this was kind of interesting. When the Apple Teacher program first came out, we were a little unsure because I thought this was just going to be about making fancy keynotes and presentations. But when we began to look at the program, actually it was quite deep. It showed teachers how to use apps in a modified way so that it's showing them how to use technology to do things that they couldn't do before. How you would collect data, how you present data, okay? How you would write reports up with audio-visual content, how you would extract data and information. And there's a whole variety of different things that we could do, how you could get very creative using an iPad. Okay, so this was all linked to pedagogy. So it's something that we kind of get all our teachers to do. And of course, with that comes the beginning of learning how to code. So we don't have a single computer scientist in our school, but all our teachers have learned Swift coding. And they've learned it through the iPad, self-paced, self-study. Okay, and the assumption is when you come to the school, you don't have any understanding of coding whatsoever. Why have we done that? Because we feel that computational thinking is something that's quite key, and it's becoming a very relevant area in terms of development, and it's something that teachers can't get to do anywhere else because that facility isn't available. You can't just go on a teacher training course to understand computational thinking. There aren't many people that understand it. So just the way in which, students that study mathematics doesn't mean that they're all going to be accountants. Just because we study code and coding doesn't mean we're all going to be making apps. But it's important to understand the notion of what this is and why it's important. So we have a base level of study that the teachers do. And of course, on Apple Teacher, there's also a little badge that you can get for answering the right questions and showing what you've done. In fact, we introduced coding from age 5 upwards. So this isn't the block stuff. This is actual lines of code. Turning left, turning right, moving forward, going backward, turning around. Okay? When we're seeing that children are actually understanding it. So if you write the line and it's incorrect code, a child of 5 and 6 can actually say that's wrong. And this is where the mistake is. So this is really kind of driving what we do and how we do things. And it's really beginning to change our approach to things. We've also then begun to look at other things as well. We've begun to look at what other things we could do in a much better way. So textbooks was another area that we really began to look at. Okay? So the idea of textbooks that are very, very expensive in schools, and they just have the same information year on year. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the circulatory system hasn't changed in the last 20 years. Still the same. And we still keep getting the same textbook with the same information and so on. So what we've done is we've really started to look at how we could make our own content in a much more interactive way with videos, 3D images, and all sorts of different subject areas and so on. And these kind of examples that I'm showing you, if you go on the last slide, there will be my Twitter handle if you've not already got it. And on the link on my profile, if you tap on that, you'll get access to all these books. Okay, they're all free. We use them in our school, and they're freely available for anyone else to use. So what does that mean for us? Okay, I'm just kind of wrapping this up and coming to the end. It's important to measure impact, because everything that I say to you, how do I know that it works? How do I know that it's made a difference? Okay, how do I know belief has been changed? And there's a number of kind of ways in which we're doing that. So one thing is for me to measure it, but what I think is more powerful is when we get people that measure this, that really know how to measure it. So we're now working with a university, so the University of Hull. They've got a researcher in our school that's measuring the impact of voice. What happens when you as a teacher are giving voice feedback to your children with intonation, with meaning? And the fact that it's reduced teacher workload. It's actually improved teachers' work-life balance. Because the amount of feedback that I can give in 10 seconds with my voice is far superior to the amount of time that I will be writing with a pen. Probably doesn't even get read. And when parents can hear this, it's actually changing. We're feeling the impact in the school. So this is something that they've come in, and they're using this particular framework to really begin to measure the impact of voice feedback and what it means. We've seen some stuff that we weren't expecting with this as well. So some of our children, they can't read to their parents at night because their parents don't speak English or the parents are not around. We're finding that some of these children are actually reading to Shobi. And the teacher listens to it, and the teacher gives feedback and encouragement and coaches them and so on. And that's kind of becoming, really powerful thing for us to do. Of course, you'll be aware in the UK we have Ofsted, which is our kind of inspectorate, and they come into schools and they observe and so on. And this is our kind of last report that happened, and there were some really interesting comments that have been kind of made when they came in. What was really interesting is that within 12 months, our school hit, the outstanding kind of rank, which is the highest that we could actually get. So that was quite an accolade for the school, the head teachers, and the teachers that have been working in this particular environment. But what's been really powerful for us is to be able for us to kind of see this. So that 68% of the children that come to the school, they are at least 2 years below their age-related expectations. So if they come to school at age 5, they're actually operating at the age of a 3-year-old. And what we've been able to see with this is that in 12 months, we've been able to see that they at least hit their age or beyond. And one of the reasons why we think that is the rapid cycle of improvement that we're seeing. If I was just using books and marking that and taking home, coming back, the children will be waiting at least a week or over the weekend. But with this, what we're seeing is the speed at which we can give feedback is actually far faster than what we've been able to do in the past. So, have beliefs changed? And for me, this is probably the slide that says yes. And that's not because we got rid of the photocopiers. My predecessor school in 2010, we still had the same number of photocopiers, same in 11, same in 12. We weren't expecting this. Kind of seems common sense now, but at that time we didn't expect this. 70% reduction in printing. Do you know why? Because teachers would just take a picture of a document that they had and upload it onto iTunes U and everyone's got it. And it worked in a very simple and reliable way. Okay? And therefore that changed belief, and therefore that changed behavior. So, overall, it's been kind of quite an interesting journey for us. There's been lots and lots of things that we've done, we've tried, we've changed. We've hit roadblocks, we've overcome them. But there's one thing that's true. The most dangerous time on that timeline is just after the last penultimate circle that says success. Because after success, you feel like we've done it and let's just sit down now. But what we realize is after we've had some wins, we can now do things that we couldn't do before. So after the voice thing, we realized about the textbooks. We're even now working and, making kind of, working with developers to kind of look at animation and looking other kind of models that are really quite fantastic to use. And, if I kind of just go into this, I'm going to show you one. This app isn't actually on the App Store yet, but I'm going to show you the kind of stuff that we're kind of looking at and doing. So if I tap on this, let's have a look. So we're looking at, again, what does technology allow us to do that we couldn't do before? Now I'm connected by cables here, but if I could, I'd be able to walk into this globe and get right into the center of it and see different things. Okay, so this is really allowing kind of students to explore things in a very, very different way. We're kind of looking at the idea of things that can be quite complicated, okay, and kind of simplifying them and looking at how we can kind of, do things in a very, very different way. And there are other kind of things that we're working on as well. Now, if I wanted to wow you, I probably could have shown you this right at the beginning. But, it's not about fancy apps. Okay, and it's not about fancy tools. Of course, these things, the novelty wears out after a while. What's really important is the bread and butter of teaching and learning. How does it actually make a difference? In the world that we live in, technology is allowing us to transform our lives, is allowing to transform how we access different services, how we order our food, how we kind of, order our clothes, how we move from one place to another. Technology is embedded in all of that. As educators and as people that are responsible for the future of our children, it's really, really important that we really begin to understand how technology is going to allow us to do things that we were just simply not able to do in the past. Thank you very much.